Alina had always lived a quiet, modest life as a healer in the small mountain village, tending to scraped knees fevers, and the occasional broken bone, never imagining that her skills would draw the attention of anyone beyond the villagers she cared for. But one night, during a storm that whipped the pine trees into frantic motion and rattled the shutters of her small cottage, a stranger arrived, leaning heavily on a cane, his coat soaked and his face pale with sickness. It was Cale, the infamous mountain man whose lands stretched across the peaks and valleys, yet whose name was spoken with a mixture of fear and awe, an enigmatic figure who had avoided human contact for years, rumored to be as harsh and unyielding as the mountains themselves. Alina's initial shock quickly turned to concern as she noticed the severity of his condition. He was barely able to speak, and his chest rose and fell with labored effort. When he finally managed words, they were startling in their bluntness and audacity. He needed her help, not just to heal him, but to grant him an heir within a year, promising that in exchange all he owned, his lands, his wealth, his entire estate, would belong to her. The proposition left Alina stunned, her mind spinning between disbelief, fear, and the strange curiosity that tugged at her heart. She could not comprehend how such a request could be made so calmly, nor why a man she barely knew would entrust her with something so intimate, so life-altering. And yet, beneath his rugged exterior and the harshness of his demand, she saw glimpses of desperation, of a man who had lived isolated and alone, whose body and soul carried the weight of years spent in solitude. Despite the shock and moral conflict, a small part of her could not ignore the vulnerability she saw in him, a vulnerability that mirrored her own quiet loneliness. For hours she tended to him, wrapping his shivering body in blankets, giving him water, and watching the storm rage outside, realizing that this encounter, strange, daring, and unnerving as it was, would change her life forever. She laughed that night with her heart pounding, torn between refusal and curiosity, knowing that Cale's proposal was not just a test of her courage but an opening into a world of danger, desire, and perhaps unexpected love. After the storm passed, Cale's condition did not improve. In fact, it worsened, and the village whispered anxiously about the mountain man's failing health. Despite her initial shock and moral hesitation, Alina found herself drawn back to his cabin, compelled by a mixture of duty, compassion, and the lingering curiosity about the man behind the rumors. The first days were tense. Cale was brusque, his body weak but his spirit stubborn, and Alina struggled to balance her care with the indignity of his audacious proposal. She tended to his fevered brow, prepared his meals, and administered herbs with precision, all the while keeping a careful distance from the implications of his request. Yet in quiet moments she began to notice subtle signs of his humanity. The way his eyes softened when he watched the sunrise from his porch, the rare but genuine humor in his dry ironic remarks, and the fleeting vulnerability when he admitted he feared the year ahead. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble, not entirely, but enough that Alina could see the man Cale truly was. A man shaped by tragedy, isolation, and a profound longing for connection, someone who had spent decades surviving but never truly living. One evening, as she applied a poultice to his aching arm, Cale spoke not of heirs or land, but of loneliness, of years spent in silence, and of the rare moments he allowed himself to hope for companionship. His words struck a chord deep within Alina, who, despite her independence and self-reliance, recognized in him the same ache she sometimes felt in the quiet hours of the night. The audacity of his proposal no longer felt entirely like a demand but a desperate plea from a man who had little time and even less chance to change his fate. It was in that moment, as the fire crackled between them and the shadows danced across the cabin walls, that Alina made a reluctant decision. She would agree. Not out of desire for wealth or fear, but out of empathy, curiosity, and a faint growing recognition that something profound could emerge from this unlikely arrangement. In agreeing, she opened herself to a year filled with uncertainty, hope, and the possibility of a bond that might transform both their lives, setting the stage for a journey neither could have anticipated, where love and duty would intertwine in ways that would challenge and ultimately reshape them both. Alina moved into Cale's isolated cabin, leaving behind the familiar rhythms of village life for the rugged, untamed world of the mountains, a place as wild and unpredictable as the man who inhabited it. The first days were challenging. The cabin was drafty, the firewood endless, and Cale's expectations exacting. Yet Alina approached each task with determination, knowing that survival in this environment required more than skill. It required patience, adaptability, and courage. Their interactions were tense at first. Cale's bluntness clashed with her independent spirit, and she resented the subtle ways he tested her endurance and resolve, whether through physical labor or pointed remarks about the urgency of their agreement. Yet, in the small, quiet moments, their connection began to deepen. Alina noticed how Cale's stoic exterior softened when she tended to his aches or prepared meals, and Cale began to watch her with an intensity that was both unnerving and oddly comforting. They shared silent mornings, breaking fast together, the quiet interrupted only by the crackling fire or the wind sweeping across the mountains, and slowly the rhythm of daily life wove a fragile intimacy between them. One evening, after a long day of clearing paths and stacking firewood, they found themselves sitting close by the hearth, exhausted yet content, and the conversation drifted from practicalities to memories, dreams, and fleeting moments of vulnerability. Alina glimpsed the loneliness Cale had carried for years, and Cale began to appreciate her strength, intelligence, and compassion, not just as a caregiver but as a woman whose presence filled the emptiness of his life in ways he had not anticipated. Though the promise of an heir still hung over them, it no longer defined their every interaction. Instead, they began to explore the fragile beginnings of trust, affection, and mutual respect. By the end of that first week, Alina realized that the mountains, once intimidating and cold, had become a shared space of discovery, where the barriers between them were slowly dissolving. Each chore completed together, each shared laugh or moment of quiet understanding, laid the foundation for something deeper than obligation or bond, that neither duty nor desperation could fully explain. In these early days of living side by side, they both sensed that their year together could evolve into something far more profound than a simple arrangement. The possibility of love, fragile yet undeniable, growing quietly in the heart of the wilderness. As the weeks passed, Cale's health grew increasingly fragile, and the shadow of his illness hung over the cabin like a persistent winter chill, testing both his endurance and Alina's resolve. The initial rhythm of their day's work, meals, quiet companionship, was interrupted by bouts of fever, coughing fits, and long nights where Cale's breathing was shallow and uneven, leaving Alina exhausted yet determined to care for him. The weight of the year-long agreement pressed on her, but so did a deeper, unexpected feeling, concern for Cale that went beyond duty. She began to see how the mountain's harsh isolation had shaped him into a man of resilience and stubborn pride, yet one who also craved warmth, understanding, and human connection. Cale, for his part, struggled with the vulnerability his illness demanded. The man who had spent decades avoiding reliance on anyone now depended on Alina for comfort, care, and attention, which both embarrassed and humbled him. In quiet conversations by the fire, he shared fragments of his past, the tragedies that had driven him into solitude, the lost loves, and the long years of silence that had hardened his heart. Alina listened, offering empathy without judgment, and slowly, the foundation of trust began to solidify. Their bond, once tenuous and strictly transactional, started to transform into genuine affection, punctuated by fleeting touches, shared laughter, and moments where words were unnecessary, yet tension lingered. The looming pressure of the one-year deadline, the ethical weight of Cale's proposal, and the constant fear that his time might run out before their connection could fully mature. Alina found herself torn between rational caution and emotional investment, questioning whether love born under such constraints could ever be real. Cale, sensing her doubts, fought his own fears, not only of death, but of failing to express the depth of feeling that had quietly grown within him. Slowly, they began to navigate this delicate balance, each learning to trust the other while acknowledging the fragility of their situation. In these trying days, their relationship deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Alina discovered strengths she hadn't realized she possessed, while Cale allowed himself to be seen not as the untouchable mountain man but as a man capable of longing, tenderness, and love. The cabin, once a place of isolation and survival, had become the setting for a fragile, growing intimacy where love and duty intertwined, and the boundaries between obligation and genuine connection began to blur. Winter deepened across the mountains, blanketing the world in white, and with the long nights came moments of quiet intimacy that neither Alina nor Cale could ignore. What had begun as a tentative partnership, founded on duty and necessity, started to shift into something far more tender and complex, though neither dared to name it aloud. One evening, after a day spent breaking trail through snowdrifts and hauling firewood, they sat together in front of the hearth, their bodies close from exhaustion, yet seeking comfort beyond warmth. The firelight cast flickering shadows across Kayla's rugged face, highlighting the vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. And Alina felt a stirring in her heart she had not anticipated. Their conversation, once measured and cautious, flowed naturally now, punctuated with shared laughter at small mishaps, soft sighs, and the occasional teasing remark that brought a rare sparkle to Kale's eyes. At a certain moment, Kale reached for her hand. Not forcefully, not demanding, but seeking connection in a way that communicated trust, longing, and a fragile hope. Alina's pulse quickened as she realized how deeply she had come to care for him. The man who had once seemed so unapproachable now occupied her thoughts in quiet, persistent ways. Their first true spark of romance was not a grand confession, but a simple, fleeting gesture, a brush of fingers, a shared smile, a moment of eye contact heavy with unspoken meaning that ignited feelings they could no longer contain. As the snow fell silently outside, the cabin became a private world where laughter, touch, and whispered conversations wove a new kind of closeness between them. Yet, the shadow of Kale's illness and the ticking clock of the year-long agreement lingered, adding urgency and tension to every tender moment. Both were aware that their growing bond could be fleeting if fate intervened, yet this awareness only deepened the intensity of their feelings. In these shared experiences, they began to see each other fully, not just as companions bound by obligation, but as individuals capable of love, tenderness, and profound emotional intimacy. By the end of that week, Alina recognized that what had begun as a shocking arrangement had transformed into something richer and more vulnerable. The fragile, undeniable first flicker of love, born in the quiet solitude of the mountains, promising warmth and connection even amid uncertainty and hardship. A spring crept into the mountains, bringing hints of green and the gentle thawing of frozen streams. Alina and Kale found their growing bond tested by forces beyond their cabin walls. Rumors of Kaya's proposal and Alina's presence had begun to reach neighboring villages, and judgmental whispers, skeptical glances, and even envy threatened the fragile peace they had built. Alina struggled with her conscience, questioning whether her feelings were genuine or a result of the circumstances that had forced them together, and she wrestled with guilt over the year-long agreement that had first brought her into Kale's life. Kale, sensitive to her turmoil, faced his own internal battles. He feared losing Alina, not just a doubt or outside interference, but to the idea that their connection might be tainted by obligation. One evening, after a particularly difficult day when a messenger from the village delivered harsh words and pointed questions, the tension between them reached a tipping point. Kale, in a rare moment of vulnerability, admitted that he had cared for her from the moment he first saw her, that her courage, compassion, and strength had captivated him far beyond what he had imagined possible. Alina, hearing the sincerity in his voice and seeing the raw honesty in his gaze, realized that her feelings mirrored his own, that the tenderness, laughter, and shared struggles had grown into a deep and abiding love. They spoke for hours, unearthing fears, hopes, and regrets, acknowledging the complexities of their arrangement while embracing the undeniable truth of their hearts. Their confessions dissolved the lingering doubts, replacing them with a newfound sense of trust and emotional intimacy. Even with Kale's illness still looming and the one-year deadline pressing close, they committed to navigating whatever challenges lay ahead together, understanding that love born in extraordinary circumstances could be just as genuine as any other. From that night forward, their relationship shifted from tentative affection to conscious devotion, each supporting the other through uncertainty, illness, and the ever-present pressures of their situation. The mountains, once a symbol of isolation and danger, now seemed to hold promise and security, providing a sanctuary for a love that had grown in secrecy, courage, and honesty. By the end of this period, Alina and Kale were no longer simply two people brought together by circumstance. They had become partners emotionally and spiritually intertwined, prepared to face the remaining trials of the year with a shared purpose and hearts fully open to one another. As the year drew to a close, Kale's health deteriorated more rapidly than ever, and the looming shadow of mortality forced both him and Alina to confront the reality they had long skirted. What had begun as a shocking proposal now carried the weight of finality. Kale's time was slipping away, and with it, the chance to secure the heir he had desperately desired. Alina, who had grown to love him deeply, faced the heart-wrenching choice: stay with him through the uncertainty and risk unbearable loss, or leave to protect herself from the inevitable grief. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Each cough, each labored breath, reminded them that the year was almost up, and every moment had become precious. In a night thick with snow and silence, Cale spoke from a place of raw vulnerability, his voice trembling as he revealed his deepest fear, not death itself but dying without Alina choosing to remain with him willingly, without her love, freely given. Alina, moved to tears, realized that her feelings had long surpassed duty or obligation. She had come to love Cale for the man he was, for the tenderness beneath his rugged exterior, and for the unwavering courage he had shown in both life and vulnerability. In that quiet, tense night, they confessed their love fully, abandoning all pretense and fear. Cale's relief and joy were tangible, but the danger of his illness remained, pressing them both to act swiftly. Alina devoted herself entirely to his care, blending her knowledge of healing with sheer determination, and slowly, under her devoted attention and the warmth of their mutual love, Cale's condition began to stabilize. The crisis forged a bond stronger than either had imagined, an unspoken promise that they would face life together, whatever it held. As dawn broke over the snowy peaks, bringing with it a fragile hope, they stood together by the fire, knowing that the test of their love was no longer just surviving the year or fulfilling a proposal, but embracing the life they had chosen to share. In that moment, the mountains, which had once symbolized isolation, fear, and obligation, became a sanctuary of triumph, hope, and enduring connection. Their love had been tested by desperation, time, and uncertainty, and it had emerged resilient and unbreakable, preparing them for the final stage of their journey, the creation of a shared legacy and the new life that awaited them in the months to come. Months passed, and with the arrival of spring, the mountains blossomed around Cale and Alina, mirroring the new life growing within their home and within Alina herself. The child she carried became a symbol not only of Cale's longing for heir but of the profound love that had taken root between them. A love that had grown from obligation into something tender, enduring, and transformative. Every day was filled with anticipation and care, as Alina prepared for the birth and Cale immersed himself in planning a future that went beyond wealth or legacy, focusing instead on family, love, and shared joy. When the long-awaited day finally arrived, Alina brought a healthy, strong child into the world, and Cale, holding the tiny life in his hands, was overwhelmed by a mix of awe, gratitude, and unconditional love. In that moment, the cabin, their sanctuary through storm, illness, and uncertainty, became a true home, filled with laughter, tears of joy, and the quiet reassurance that their bond was permanent and unshakable. Cale entrusted all he owned to Alina, not as a transactional fulfillment of the proposal that had begun their journey, but as a testament to the partnership and devotion they now shared, a gesture that celebrated love, trust, and the life they were building together. They moved forward as a family, learning to navigate parenthood, community, and the responsibilities of shared inheritance, but always returning to the love that had brought them through trials, sickness, and doubt. Alina, once cautious and wary, now embraced her place beside Cale with confidence, knowing that her choices had led to real, lasting happiness, not just a temporary arrangement. Together, they watched their child grow, each milestone a reflection of the life they had forged through courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to one another. The mountains, once harsh and isolating, now stood as guardians of their legacy, a reminder that even in the most remote and challenging places, love could flourish, heal, and endure. The shocking proposal that had begun as a desperate plea had blossomed into a story of triumph, illustrating that love born under extraordinary circumstances could become the foundation for a family, a home, and a future full of hope, devotion, and the unshakable promise of togetherness. Their hearts, once shadowed by loneliness and uncertainty, were now fully united, ready to face life's adventures as a family strengthened by love, trust, and the legacy they had created together.